My name is Donald Sassoon. I'm Emeritus Professor of Comparative European History. The fifth lecture is about the rise of America and its decline. Some states, because of their strength, geographical position and economy, can aspire to what has been called hegemony, a term difficult to define. It is usually used with reference to the United States in the period after the Second World War. Today, there are no powerful international hegemons. The Soviet Union is no more. China is not strong enough yet. Europe is in disarray. The United States, in spite or because of the 800 military bases throughout the world, is in decline. Europe is now part of the world's periphery. Europeans talk about Europe ceaselessly. They wonder what its role is, where it is going, whether the United States can continue to lead them, or whether some new hegemon will emerge. Yet we should not forget that it is not inevitable that one country and one country alone should rule the world. In fact, no one ever ruled the world. And hegemonic powers were hegemonic at most within a determinate region. Alexander Macedonia, ancient Rome, Imperial China, Genghis Khan Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire in history, Mughal India, the Inca and Aztec empires in what is now Latin America, and the Ottoman Empire. Britain, towards the end of the 18th century, and for much of the 19th century, was not a hegemon. She ruled the waves, or so she thought, since she had the strongest navy in the world, and by the end of the 19th century, the largest empire ever. And Britain was also the main trading nation, but she did not control the world. The United States was not a hegemon before the Second World War, though it had been the leading industrial power at least since 1900. And even after 1945, the United States, though certainly the main superpower, faced the communist bloc. It could not do as it pleased. It could not prevent the communist revolution in China. It was unable to stop the division of Korea. It suffered an unprecedented humiliation in Vietnam. It had to accept a communist state, Cuba, a few miles from the shores of Florida. It could not protect one of its chief allies in the Middle East, the Shah of Iran, from being ousted by the followers of the Ayatollah Khomeini. America's hegemony or greatness, if one wants to use such term, lies in the field of popular culture, music, films, etc., or in software, Apple, Microsoft, or in social media, Facebook, Twitter, etc. And let us not forget the global importance of the dollar. People, or at least some of them, have embraced the idea of Americanism, but not America's physical product. We in Europe and elsewhere adopted the idea of the American kitchen, but we bought German or Italian washing machine and dishwashers. We buy Japanese and Korean televisions. For much of the 19th century, Britain was the ideal modernity, but this was increasingly challenged. The United States and France thought they were at least as modern as Britain, which was after all a monarchy, while a truly modern country, they thought, should be a republic. Besides, Britain did very little to project an image of modernity. On the contrary, it sought to combine its undoubted scientific and industrial progress with an unremitting respect for traditions, many of which it invented with surprising zeal. But by the beginning of the 20th century, the torch of modernity had passed to America, where so many Europeans had gone to improve their living conditions and make their fortunes. The United States, the country with no past, had become the country of the future. The 30 years or so that followed the American Civil War changed the shape of the country dramatically. It became the leading manufacturing country in the world, overtaking Great Britain. The population had nearly doubled, thanks to massive immigration. The myth of America was particularly strong in laggard countries, such as Russia. As was to be expected, reformers were the most pro-American. The Russian economist Ivan Ozerov in 1903 pointedly contrasted Russian bureaucratic arrogance, the absence of civil rights, risk-averse entrepreneurs, Russian workers accused by him of being drunk, illiterate, and lacking in discipline and work ethics, with American initiative, energy, sobriety, education, and the protection given to every individual. And the Russian poet Alexander Blok, in a poem in 1913 entitled Novaya Amerika, New America, imagined a Russia in the image of a new great model shining across the ocean. This was a laggard conception of America, America as a future. Each country had its own way of becoming like America, its own way of catching up, of becoming like the others, while remaining different, knowing that no two roads can be alike, hence the proliferation of claims to distinctiveness. As with most things in history, America's own path was unique and unrepeatable. The country's outstanding economic performance in both the 19th and the 20th century was due to a multiplicity of factors, but the central one was the vast open lands and territories drawing forth Europe's pullulating rural swarms, which led to a formidable increase of its population. This constantly expanded the number of producers and consumers while containing wages. The American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, has been seen as an epic conflict between slave owners and the liberators of the slaves. Yes, it was also a conflict between an old traditional society in the South and the new world of capitalism in the North. The political economy of a slave South clashed with that of a North based on free labor. The victory of the North was also a victory for Northern capitalism. In fact, the Civil War turned out to be the first great international military victory of capitalism. It was also a victory for democracy, since the freed slaves enjoyed the same political rights as whites, though not for long. The black man had been a slave, now he was a disenfranchised laborer. W.E.B. Du Bois, scholar, Pan-Africanist, civil rights activist, lamented that following the Civil War, I quote, "The slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back towards slavery." America became the envy of the world well before its consumer society. Its market was bigger than any in Europe. Its productivity was higher. Its marketing techniques were unequaled. By the end of the 19th century, the United States was already the capitalist country par excellence, while England remained full of aristocrats pretending to despise capitalism. The chief myth of Americanism was embodied in the popular dime novels of Horatio Alger, with their heartwarming stories of young orphans coming to the cities from the countryside, who, with some hard work and plenty of amazing luck, became successful. These rags to riches novels, almost 100 of them telling more or less the same story, became the American story. Yet the real winners were not the small men, but the large manufacturing corporations. By 1910, they became the dominant form of business, and they paid high wages because the demand for labor grew at a faster rate than the flow of immigrants. The combination of a large domestic market, constant innovation, and rising productivity was unbeatable. It may well be to the advantage of a single capitalist to exploit his workers, pay them absurdly low wages, make them redundant at the slightest whim of a business cycle, but collectively, capitalists need prosperous workers, able and willing to buy the goods produced. They need satisfied workers, able and willing to turn up to the factory gates with, if not quite a smile on their faces, at least able and willing to work another day with some prospects that their conditions of existence will not deteriorate and will perhaps improve. Henry Ford, the boss of Ford Motor Cars, understood this perfectly well. Although an uncomplicated union basher, an anti-Semite, and an admirer of Adolf Hitler, he was an authentic pioneer of 20th century capitalism. High wages were a way of bribing workers away from militancy. American wages remain higher than European ones, though welfare was much lower in the United States than in advanced European countries. After 1945, American capitalism grew unprecedentedly, but many of the laggards were, if not catching up, developing their own capitalism. The main challenge appeared to be the Soviet Union, which after the 1917 revolution seemed to develop an industrial society on an entirely new basis. Yet its industrial growth and success in the Second World War were achieved at enormous human cost and under a brutal regime. The other challengers, post-war Germany and Japan, France and Italy, and the Asian four dragons, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, and South Korea, in spite of their economic success, could never pose a serious threat to the rising American hegemony. Once communism collapsed in 1989-91, it looked as if nothing stood in the way of American power. Yet, this was the beginning of its decline. The new challenger was China, just recovering from the enormous cost of the great leap forward of the late 1950s and the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s. China embarked on what it called socialism with Chinese characteristics, in fact, the introduction of a market economy in what was fundamentally a system controlled by the Communist Party. The United States is still the dominant capitalist country, but its domestic problems cause international concern. These range from its huge homicide rate, 5.4 per 100,000 people, which is far higher than that in comparable advanced countries, such as Japan, 0.3, South Korea, 0.7, Italy 0.7, mafia notwithstanding, Germany 1.2, New Zealand 1, United Kingdom 1.2, France 1.3, and also the United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world. While inequalities have increased dramatically, the opioid crisis led, in 2016, to 63,000 deaths due to overdose, more than the total number of Americans killed in Vietnam. Washington has now resorted to a trade war with China. After the collapse of communism, there is no credible systemic challenge to global capitalism, mainly because there is no such a thing as global capitalism. There are different interconnected capitalism, often clashing, as has always been the case, leading to crisis as in the past, and each crisis part of a process for the reorganization of capitalism. Capitalism has global tendencies, both in its production and its consumption. It runs where it can, where there are profits, opportunities, openings. Every failure of one capitalist is another capitalist success. Every crisis has winners. Every triumph is temporary. As Joseph Schumpeter, the Austrian-born American political economist, wrote, capitalism is like a hotel where the clients are forever changing.